My daughter pointed to my A-level graduation photo and asked who the most handsome boy in it was. I paused for a few seconds. He's someone Mummy fancied for many years. Why didn't you two get married? Because he always preferred girls prettier than me. In my most desperate year of pining, I chose to marry someone else to make him regret. Later I discovered that I could fall in love with someone else too. Ding! This novel reminds you to click the subscribe button in the bottom right corner to read the complete novel. That afternoon after school, as I was helping the teacher mark exam papers in the office, my mind was filled with one thought. Gosh! Ethan must have left already. For an entire term, I had been secretly following behind him, pretending we were walking home together. I told myself that the day I couldn't keep up, I would stop liking him. In the hallway, the students on cleaning duty had all gone. Feeling dejected, I returned to the classroom. There, I saw Ethan Walsh sitting alone at my desk, flipping through a book he had picked up randomly. "Why haven't you left yet?" I asked. Before this, I had never spoken more than 3 sentences to him. "Waiting for you, silly girl," he said. I thought he must like me a little. He was often late, rushing into the classroom with a bag of buns and soy milk, placing them on my desk just before the form teacher arrived. After the school basketball team's matches, he would push through the crowd just to ask me one question. "Kathy, who were you watching just now?" He would sneak his mobile phone into school and slip me his earphones during evening study hall to let me listen to my idol's new album. But he would also suddenly become distant after returning from a summer holiday. Until one PE lesson, when I stumbled upon him alone in the classroom with the pretty new transfer student. "Someone might see," she said. "You don't want to?" he asked, his voice lilting with his usual mischief. The transfer student pushed him coyly. "Ethan, you're so naughty." People gossiped privately. Ethan moved on so quickly. "Well, look how pretty she is." That Kathy before was so plain and dark. Men are such visual creatures. When it came time to apply for universities, Ethan received early admission to the top university in the north. I chose the farthest teachers' college in the south. After graduation, we went our separate ways. I didn't even add him on WhatsApp. On the hottest afternoon of my second year, I was watching shows in my dorm room after class. My roommate burst in excitedly from her date, exclaiming, "Oh my God, did you see? There's a super hot guy standing downstairs waiting for someone. Is he from our faculty?" "I don't think so, never seen him before." They crowded by the window, dragging me down to look. I poked my head out and saw Ethan Walsh being gawked at by onlookers. He stood with his hands in his pockets, looking up and smiling at me. I showed him around our university and the night market as an ordinary high school classmate would. "When are you heading back?" I asked as we passed through an underground passage filled with the clamor of skateboarders and buskers with guitars. He heard me despite the noise. "Flight's at dawn," he replied. "Such a rush?" "Yeah, I have an 8 a.m. class tomorrow." I walked in front, with him behind me. We passed some guys from my department who greeted me. As we climbed the steps under a streetlight, Ethan took my hand. I turned to look at him. He hooked his finger around my ring finger and asked, "Kathy, didn't you miss me at all?" He was always like this, suddenly appearing just when I was about to give up. For the entire first term of my third year, Ethan and I chatted daily despite being over 1,000 miles apart. He told me the washing machine in his dorm was broken, so he had to queue for ages to get hot water. I said I had many classes that day, so I'd call him later. He replied, his tone playful, "It's not like I haven't waited for you before." I watched the clock on the wall, waiting for class to end. "Kathy, going to the cafeteria?" my classmates asked. "No, you go ahead," I said, hugging my textbooks as I headed out. "I'm going back to the dorm first." I made my way down the crowded stairs, my mind filled with thoughts of one face. Kathy Lowe. Until that familiar voice called my name. At the entrance of Building 3, swarming with people, stood the very person I had been thinking of. Ethan Walsh, who said he'd be waiting for my call. The plane tickets he used to visit me that year could have covered 4 years of my tuition fees. Everyone thought I had a rich, clingy, handsome boyfriend. Sometimes I wondered if there were any limits to Ethan's love. One rainy afternoon near the end of my third year, I ran back to the dorm after finishing an exam. I stood in the corridor with my headphones, talking to him on the phone. Downstairs, couples lingered reluctantly at the dorm entrance. In my ear, Ethan said he had something to tell me. "Kathy, I like someone," he said. He told me I was his best friend, so I was the first to know. He showed me a photo of the girl. She was beautiful. The mixed-race type of girl he always liked. "Ethan, friends don't hold hands," I said. I blocked him. I cut off all contact cleanly, and he never tried to reach me again. It seemed my departure didn't upset him at all. Not one bit. I began to obsess over my appearance out of spite. Whitening treatments, makeup, using every method to make myself look prettier. I couldn't tell if I was doing it to make him regret, or because of what those boys in high school had said. That Kathy Lowe is so plain and dark. Just like I couldn't tell if after all these years, I truly liked him, or if it was because I was never chosen. Later, I did run into him at a reunion. There was no spark like I had imagined. He acted very nonchalant. We didn't speak or even make eye contact the whole time. Only when I was leaving early, at the stairwell, a former male classmate from high school stopped me. He wanted to add me on WhatsApp. "Shall I drive you home?" he offered, about to get his car. I politely declined. The deep winter was cold. I was wearing a short skirt and white boots, the wind tousling my hair. After he left, I reached into my bag for my scarf and turned around. Ethan was standing on the steps, watching me. He had been watching for a long time. "Don't add him," he said, his voice low. "He's not a good person." They say Ethan's relationships never last long, but I was the exception. I wasn't a friend, wasn't a lover. Yet I stayed by his side for many years. Entangled. He occupied my entire naive youth. By the time I woke up, I had reached the age where people started pressuring me to get married. But he wasn't someone who would marry me. Ethan had heard the voice messages from my mom urging me to get married. He also knew I was being set up on blind dates with others. But he didn't care. He buried his face in the crook of my neck, breathing in the scent of my hair, and said casually, "I'll marry you." "Do you love me?" I asked him. He paused. "We're compatible." I stared at him motionlessly. "We've known each other for so long, we know everything about each other," he said with a smile. "If I can't find anyone I like by 35, I'll marry you." I fell silent. "Are you angry?" He tried to coax me. "Haven't you liked me for many years? Isn't this what you wanted?" So he knew all along. I just felt it was absurd. He believed that with just a gesture, I would always return to his side. Just like I believed that someone truly heartbroken could let go so easily. So, the day after he finally said he wanted to marry me after all these years of playing the field, I silently turned and left. I took out the study abroad visa I had prepared long ago and left the country. 6 years later, at a private club. As I came out of the restroom, someone recognized me in the linden-lined corridor. "Kathy Lowe?" I turned around to see a group of familiar classmates. And in the middle of the crowd was Ethan Walsh. His eyes were deep-set, his sharp edges more prominent than ever. He looked at me quietly. After I left, he neither went mad searching for me nor did he wallow in drunken despair. Instead, he successfully started his own business, which was about to go public. "So you really came back to the UK? I heard your family went bankrupt," they asked me. "How can you afford to be here? Still not married, are you? You're not back to reconcile with Ethan, are you?" Someone joked. The woman next to Ethan overheard this. She gripped his wrist tightly, looking at me with hostility. Not far away, my daughter ran over and hugged my leg. "Mommy." Everyone stared wide-eyed at my daughter. She looked 7 or 8 parts like Ethan. "You even have a child now?" Someone reacted, instinctively looking towards Ethan. How does she look a bit like you?" My daughter blinked, then looked up at his face. "Aw, Mummy, that's the handsome man from your photos." I picked her up, turning to leave. But Ethan grabbed my hand. "Is she mine?" he asked me. I was about to speak. Behind us, a group of VIP guests approached. The private club belonged to the Walsh family, and among tonight's big shots was the new head of the Walsh family, Ethan's brother, Oscar Walsh. He passed by us, surrounded by his entourage. "Daddy," my daughter called out sweetly. The group stopped in their tracks. My daughter reached out her hand and, under everyone's gaze, called out loudly again, "Daddy, hug me." Oscar glanced over at the sound, his gaze pausing. Before coming back to the UK, we had been having a Cold War. He didn't know I had brought our daughter back. I've never heard this one was married. She couldn't even handle Ethan, let alone his brother. "It's impossible." The woman beside Ethan sneered. "Little girl, you shouldn't call just anyone daddy and try to claim relations." She pointed at my nose, eager to show off in front of the Walsh family. "How did you teach her?" Although my daughter was only 5, she understood. Her little hand gripped my clothes tightly. "Amy." Oscar called our daughter's nickname. Tall and slender, he skillfully took her from my arms with one hand. "Go wait for me in the car first," he said to me. He didn't look at Ethan once. I nodded and followed his assistant, leaving behind a group of people both shocked and afraid to ask more questions. "Congratulations on having a niece," someone said, trying to smooth things over and attempting to flatter Ethan. "It's normal for a niece to look like her uncle." "It's a good thing." One comment after another, making Ethan's face grow increasingly dark. Yet the woman beside him hurried to comfort him. "I've seen plenty of women like her. She doesn't really love you. She just wants to marry into the Walsh family." "When you weren't available, she switched to your brother." Ethan lowered his gaze and gripped the woman's chin. "Having a child and thinking she can marry into the Walsh family?" "Daydreaming," he chuckled. "You don't have that ability, and she certainly doesn't either." "Mr. Walsh sent me to pick you up," the chauffeur said. The Walsh family car was waiting for me at the entrance hall. I opened the door and sat in the back seat. There was someone else in the back. Thinking it was Oscar, I instinctively said in a coquettish tone, "Please don't be angry, But I realized it was Ethan Walsh sitting in the dim, flickering light. "You what?" he said, resting his head on his hand. "How you used to coax me, now you coax my brother the same way." I didn't respond. I turned to get out of the car, but the doors were locked. "You can go," he said to the driver. "Open the door," I said coldly, "or I'll call the police." He chuckled lightly. "Let's just talk for a bit. Don't worry, I'm not interested in things others have touched." I took out my phone to call Oscar. He was quick, grabbing my wrist and ending the call. "So what are you to him?" He let go of my hand. "A mistress? Long-term or short-term?" A red mark appeared around my wrist. "You refused to marry me back then, wanting to leave whenever you pleased," Ethan said in a consistently calm tone. "Now you turn around and have his child without any commitment? What benefits does he give you? Bags, jewelry, houses, or money? Kathy, you never asked for any of these things when you were with me." I looked up at him and asked, "When were we ever together?" Thinking back, I wasn't even a backup option. "Ethan, I love him," I said very honestly. "I really do, even more than I loved you back then." There was a fleeting moment of pain in his eyes before they cleared again. "I'm looking out for you," he said. "As a friend, I'm just trying to advise you if you're not doing well." Ethan turned his head slightly. "Oscar is not a good person." "He is good," I said without hesitation. Ethan laughed, annoyed, unable to control his tone. "You don't need to go this far just to upset me." He looked at me, still thinking he could see through my heart. "Choose someone else, find someone suitable for you." He spoke slowly. "If there's no one suitable, I can introduce you to someone." I looked at him. "I married your brother. I am his wife, your sister-in-law." He stared at me, laughing for no reason. "How old are you? Don't you know your own situation? How could he possibly marry you?" He spoke very lightly. "To put it bluntly, if I didn't want you, why would he pick you up?" I slapped him hard across the face, stunning him. Then, he raised his hand to his lip corner, laughing even more heartily. I'll consider that debt paid, he said. Now we're even. The car unlocked. Without any hesitation, I turned and got out of the car. Kathy, he called out. He lowered the car window and leaned out. The wind blew through his short hair. He still had that carefree look, spoiled by the girls who chased after him when he was a teenager. It's fine to fool others, but don't fool yourself. It's not worth it. You're not young anymore, it's time to face reality. Reality. I'm not wealthy, just average looking, and no longer young. I don't have many advantages in the dating market. Ethan's friends all say I'm lucky as hell to have landed him. When I spent all my savings to study abroad, I thought I'd never forget him. But when you're desperately short on cash, all you can think about is making money. During breaks from my internship, I'd occasionally see photos of Ethan with his new girlfriend on social media. This one lasted a while. Everyone said she had won him over. Loving someone with all your heart when you're young, only to end up as a joke. After that, I never had the energy to love anyone else, and I was convinced I'd never be loved again. But why did he get to move on so easily while I was the only one left hurting? That winter during my master's program, I saw a photo on the alumni wall of honor that looked strikingly similar to Ethan. The man had chiseled features, an aristocratic bone structure, and an even colder demeanor. He seemed impatient about having his picture taken, with an innate nobility in his eyes that was hard to pin down. Similar to Ethan, yet different. He donated a building to the university. My teaching assistant said, noticing I had been staring for a while. Back in the day, not a single person who pursued him succeeded. What's his name? I asked. Oscar Walsh. Ethan's half-brother whom he despised the most. Their father had gotten rich through his father-in-law's connections. Then used that money to have an affair and marry Ethan's mother. If I want something, he has to give it to me, Ethan once told me when he took me to his family's holiday villa. It was the first time he mentioned Oscar. Oscar had an old dog, almost 10 years old, that had been with him for years. I said I wanted it, so my dad gave it to me. Oscar refused, so my dad beat him. He pointed to a shallow dent in the doorframe. Beat him until his head was bloody and dazed, but he still wouldn't let go of the dog. What happened then? I asked. Of course I got the dog, but I didn't really care for it that much, he said nonchalantly. When Oscar came back from a week in the hospital, he found out I'd given the dog away. I looked dismayed. Feeling sorry for him? He's no pushover, Ethan said, turning my face back towards him. He always hated when I paid too much attention to other men, especially Oscar. So at first, I intentionally tried to get close to Oscar. It was the end of the rainy season on that alumni day. My heel had broken, and I was helplessly trying to stay dry in my formal dress. By chance, his luxury car drove by. He had his driver pass me an umbrella. I asked if I could get in the car for a ride. He drove me all the way to his hotel. I was inexperienced. Sitting on his lap, I fumbled with his shirt buttons, my hands roaming clumsily. He finally couldn't take it anymore. He moved my hands away and chuckled softly. What do you want? He recognized me. A professor had spoken highly of me and recommended me to him a few weeks ago. That's why he had patiently watched me put on an act the whole way. I know you hate your brother, I said, looking up at him. So do I. He was clever. He must have guessed I had a history with Ethan. I want to make him regret, I said, laying bare my intentions. I want him to see how great we are together and come crying back, begging me to return to him. I want to prove I can be 1,000 times better off without him. And then what? He asked, his gaze distant. You forgive him and start over? No. I didn't know what I wanted. I felt trapped in a vicious cycle, desperately trying to prove something. But deep down, I knew Ethan didn't love me. So no matter who I loved, he wouldn't care. I picked up my clothes, got up, and said to Oscar, I'm sorry. I hated who I had become. Under the bus stop, against the blue night cityscape. I waited for 10 minutes before realizing the buses were on strike. Oscar's car pulled up in front of me. He hadn't come himself, but out of courtesy had sent his driver to take me home. Before I got out, the driver called out to me. Mr. Walsh asked me to tell you something. Ethan Walsh is a scoundrel. You're too good for him. Don't waste your energy on someone who doesn't deserve it. I thought, Oscar is truly kind. But people from such different worlds would never cross paths again. At least, that's what I sincerely believed at the time. New Year's Eve. To earn money for a plane ticket home, I accompanied my roommate to go skiing in the mountains. Do you know why I wanted you to come? My roommate asked, linking her arm with mine. I want to pursue that senior. His family is incredibly wealthy, and you're perfect to make me look better by comparison. The senior did seem very enthusiastic about her. I thought beautiful girls always had beautiful friends, but I guess that's not always the case. He joked, trying to liven up the atmosphere. Don't take this the wrong way, he said to me with an intimate smile at my roommate. But you're just not as appealing to men as she is. You don't have a boyfriend, do you? Of course she doesn't, my roommate quickly interjected. The two of them laughed and bantered as we walked to the private ski slope. Wow, is this your family's property? My roommate exclaimed. It was that liminal time between afternoon and evening, with a soft moon hanging in the powder blue sky. Amidst the vast expanse of white snow, I spotted the Walsh family's car. My dad manages the resort for the owner, he said, pointing to a car in the distance. See that? Do you know who he is? My roommate shook her head. The senior whispered a name in her ear, causing her to gasp and cover her mouth. Can we go say hello to him? She asked excitedly. It's not that easy to meet him, he replied. Halfway up the mountain, the senior suddenly smacked his forehead. Oh no, I forgot. The weather's been bad these past couple days, so the advanced trail is closed. My roommate protested, insisting on going up. I came here to take photos for WhatsApp. We can't leave without doing that. All right, we'll just go up for a quick look, he conceded. The senior took her with him, leaving me behind. They dumped their belongings with me and told me to wait for them to come back down. I waited for nearly an hour. I thought about heading down the mountain first with their things. But halfway down, I encountered an avalanche. Later, I found out they had seen the weather turning bad when they reached the advanced trail. And took the cable car down, completely forgetting about me. As the snow engulfed me, everything went white before my eyes. I was going to die. I never imagined I'd die alone in a foreign country. I thought of my father. He used to take me skiing often when I was little. But he had been gone for many years now. Then I thought of my mother. After remarrying, she had a son of her own. Afraid of upsetting her new husband and son, she told me not to visit next time. Later, I met Ethan Walsh. I thought if I just tried hard enough to be good to him, he might be a little kinder to me in return. In the end, I had no one. Dying alone didn't seem so bad then. At least the sunset was beautiful that day. Kathy. My consciousness was fading, but I heard someone calling my name over and over. I tried to speak but couldn't make a sound. Using all my strength, I pulled the bell on my backpack. Kathy. A pair of hands pulled me out of the snow. It's all right now, baby, he said. Hold on to me. Leaning against his back, he put his ski jacket on me. It was so warm. Having narrowly escaped death, I couldn't tell if it was a dream or reality. I felt nothing but endless fear, tears streaming down my face and falling onto the back of his neck. He paused and asked, "Are you still scared?" I recognized him as Oscar Walsh. The Oscar I had only met once before, who lived in a completely different world from mine. I said in a muffled voice, "I don't want Ethan Walsh to regret coming to find me. I just don't understand why love has to be so difficult. I'm just afraid. I'm afraid no one will ever love me." Silence. It was so quiet I almost dozed off again. He gently set me down. Stay awake, baby. The sound of a helicopter grew closer. I leaned against his chest. His breath came out in white puffs as he removed his goggles with one hand to look at me. Such beautiful eyes. Mesmerizing. He said, "Kathy, come love me instead." I woke up after 2 days of fever. In his villa. The still lake had frozen over, and the moonlight was deep blue. He coughed a few times and reached out to feel my forehead, discovering that I was looking at him. "Are you still feeling unwell?" he asked. I shook my head. He said to rest well and that his private jet would take me back to university. "What about you?" I asked. "I have to go," he said. "I'm already half an hour late." I held on to him. He lowered his eyes, looking at me. "Do you know what this means?" he asked. "I do." He let me have my way. I ran out of breath and started to slip down, but he supported me. Oscar turned his face away, chuckling softly. "Still haven't learned, have you?" I forgot that the most restrained and disciplined people can also be extreme. When passion and desire pour out, it's boundless. Oscar was truly wicked. After doing everything, at the moment when one is most vulnerable, he still had to ask, "Am I being too rough?" I made a show of pushing him away. He laughed and held my hand. In the early hours of that morning, after days of snowfall, it finally stopped. As naturally as if he were asking me to have breakfast, he said, "Let's get married." I bolted upright in bed. "You don't need to feel responsible for me," I waved my hand. "I mean, this was mutual. You need to be responsible for me," he said. His black hair looked especially soft in the daylight. It was my first time. He took me to meet his mother. As we drove past the century-old buildings in the city center, I pointed outside and said, "I've always wondered what kind of people live in there." He held my hand. "Well, you'll find out today." His mother was very gentle. She gave me many gifts. "No," I asked Oscar, feeling overwhelmed as we left the house, holding a jade bracelet. "If we break up, do I have to return these?" "You won't need to return them." He sighed, gently pushed my head, and opened the car door, ushering me in. The wedding was grand. Looking at the extra zeros in my bank account balance, I felt even more surreal about becoming Oscar's wife. When my roommate heard the news of my marriage, she didn't believe it. After inquiring and confirming its authenticity, she blocked me. The senior from the university did call me, saying a bunch of flattering things. His family had lost their ski resort management rights because he broke the rules by bringing someone. To be honest, he complained a bit, "You were partly responsible for what happened back then." "Don't take this the wrong way," I sincerely suggested. "Since you understand so well what men like, why don't you do some work that pleases men?" He was speechless for a while, then hung up. I found out I was pregnant in the 3rd month of our marriage. I was busy with graduation and internship. Before leaving work, I made sure to use the bathroom one more time. There was bleeding. I didn't think much of it and cycled to the hospital by myself. After drawing over a dozen vials of blood, I felt dizzy. The doctor said I needed to be hospitalized to prevent miscarriage. "Do you have any family members?" Only then did I remember, I had an Oscar. He arrived with his coat, having flown from the West Coast in the early hours. I smiled foolishly and waved at him. "What are you smiling about?" His voice was gentle, but his eyes showed a hint of anger. "I'm happy to see you," I said. With that one sentence, he wasn't angry anymore. Oscar sighed, crouched in front of me, and rested his head on my knee. Breathing heavily, he said, "Rely on me a little, will you?" I stroked his hair. It was short and prickly, yet soft, carrying the moisture of early spring. 5 years after Amy was born. At a party. Oscar Walsh stood by the railing on the 2nd floor, gazing down at the endless swimming pool below. People by the pool were gossiping about domestic affairs. There was a woman who loved Ethan Walsh for nearly 10 years. She was very devoted. In the end, she left without a word, asking for nothing. Oscar's hand paused as he poured whiskey, listening. Someone asked, "Didn't Ethan show any reaction?" The speaker chuckled. The next day, he threw away all of that girl's things. How heartless. That's what everyone says, but guess what? The person raised an eyebrow and continued. He went back at midnight and picked everything up, put it all in a special room. And he's still living in the flat she rented before leaving the country. No one responded. "Do you believe," the person said, "if she comes back, Ethan will be tied down in no time?" As they continued talking downstairs, the topic changed. Amy came looking for Oscar with her toy. Daddy. He was slightly startled, and as he turned to hug her, he saw me. That night, Oscar asked me, if I wasn't his brother, would you have come to find me at the alumni meeting that day? Saying yes would be a lie, I told him honestly, but it was different later. Because of the child? He asked. Because you're so good, I gradually fell for you. He got up and stroked my head. So gentle, as if he would never get angry with me. It's okay, he said. You don't have to force yourself to say you love me. That was our first direct emotional conflict. He minded. I had no way to explain. Are you leaving? I asked, leaning against the door. Having been subjected to cold violence for too many years, I was subconsciously afraid of conflict. Afraid that if he got angry, he would never come back. No, he said. He walked past me and locked the door behind him. He lifted my hair. What's that phrase again, baby? He looked at me, pausing. Make hate. Begging was useless. Whatever I couldn't stand normally, that's what I got. I couldn't bear the force, hitting the headboard. He put his hand to cushion it, saying softly, sorry, did I hurt you? I shook my head, then nodded. Wait, I raised my hand, I want some water. Stay thirsty. He gripped my ankle, flipping me over. I couldn't say another word. Only the remnants of sound, trying to hold back but spilling out, as I was shattered. A fine night in the deep Mediterranean summer. At dawn, stars and moon sank into the calm, shimmering sea. He turned his head, leaning against the white gauze curtain to smoke. Several clear scratches on his back. I had never seen him smoke before, he usually controlled himself extremely well. Noticing I was awake, he got up and brought me water. Kathy. I looked up at him. He bent down to kiss my heart, so gently. He said, if you run back to the country to see him, I'll lock you up. We had a cold war for 3 days. He went back to the country for a meeting. I took Amy. Come on, let's go pick up Daddy and bring him home. I got out of Ethan's car. I stood in the wind for a while before calling Oscar. 10 minutes later, he came to pick me up. Where's Amy? I asked as I got into the passenger seat. She fell asleep, so I took her home, he replied, turning the steering wheel. The passing lights illuminated his profile. Where are we going? I asked excitedly. Are you secretly taking me somewhere nice to eat? He glanced at me before looking back at the road. No. I'm taking you to a special place to keep you locked up. Oscar still ended up taking me to my favorite restaurant. How are you going to lock me up? I asked, following him back to the car after we finished eating. He picked up a file from the back seat and took me to the registry office at the police station. Oscar was all businesslike as he presented the certified translated documents. My marital status on the registry changed from single to married. I blinked at him. So this is your idea of locking me up? He raised an eyebrow. We live in a society governed by law. Using the legality of marriage to reduce your chances of bigamy, he said, tapping my head. To prevent you from having one husband abroad and another at home. I silently reached for the car door. He stretched out his hand and closed it. So you still went to see him? No, I missed you, I looked up at him. I came to take you home, husband. I told him he was too mean, making me be the one to make up after the Cold War. He asked, what compensation do you want? To outsiders, Oscar was the perfect gentleman, raised with an elite education. He would never indulge in uncontrollable, potentially rule-breaking addictions. Nor would he find himself trapped in a passive situation. But at that moment in the car park, inside the car, I covered his mouth and nose. He looked down at me. As the feeling of suffocation spread, he remained restrained and calm. His abdominal breathing tightened, long and drawn out, affecting me on top of him. Rising and falling. He was almost out of breath, his eyes reddening. I had gone too far. He grasped my wrist and moved it away. Primal desire released, his gaze held the innate attitude of one in control. But he had to lower his head. Softly calling me, Kathy. I collapsed into his arms, panting. My phone rang with an unknown number. My hand shook as I accidentally answered. Kathy Lowe. In the heated car, Ethan's voice was particularly clear. I've checked. Oscar is already married abroad. You've been deceived. Ethan continued talking. Beg me. I can help get your daughter registered. Shocked, I burst into a fit of coughing. Noticing something was off, he asked, What are you doing? Oscar leaned back in his seat, raising an eyebrow as he helped me catch my breath. He took the phone and said only one sentence. She's busy. Ethan realized what was happening. After half a minute of silence, he hung up. The next day, news of Ethan's impending marriage spread everywhere. Apparently, the bride-to-be was his high school sweetheart. As I was packing to return home abroad, the class representative called me. Come to the class reunion, see the teachers, he said. Who knows when we'll see you again? I agreed. I just didn't expect to run into Ethan's first love, Daisy Carter. That beautiful transfer student. How many carats? They asked, touching the engagement ring on Daisy's finger. The latecomers were also eager to greet her, brushing past me to squeeze onto my chair. Hey you, she called to me, move over a bit. In the end, there was no space left, so I called the waiter to add a chair. Daisy spoke up, telling me to sit next to her. She looked at my bag. Oh my, your bag is so old. How many years have you had it? A busybody asked, how much did it cost? This bag was a handmade one I made with Amy. Not much, I said. It looks like it's only 20 or 30 quid, the person insisted on getting a clear answer. Someone spoke up for me, so what if it is? As long as it's useful. That person sneered, only poor people comfort themselves like that. The atmosphere cooled, and Daisy played the good person. She held my hand, her tone pitying. It's already good that you can live like this. I heard you're a single mom, didn't even have a wedding? It's a pity, but it'll be hard to find someone with your circumstances. Those around her laughed in agreement. Who could compete with you? No one could win against you back then. As people were leaving, Ethan Walsh walked into the room. Everyone thought he wouldn't come. He said he was here to pick up Daisy. Classmates congratulated and envied them, showering them with blessings. I turned to leave with the crowd. As I passed him, he grabbed my wrist. Then, he let go. Why don't you ride in my car? He asked abruptly, drawing everyone's attention. Where do you live now? Daisy smiled stiffly, holding onto Ethan's arm. Yes, we can give you a lift if it's on the way. No need, I said, I'll take a taxi. Before I could finish, a drunk male classmate interrupted, Isn't anyone picking you up? He had once tried to add me on WhatsApp. Huh, you looked down on me back then, trying to climb higher, he sneered. Did you think Ethan would fall for you? You women are all like this, your pride ruins you. Just then, a car stopped outside. Snow flew up. Oscar climbed the steps, holding an umbrella. I recognized him and ran towards him. Weren't you supposed to be in a meeting? It ended early. His appearance caused an uproar. Didn't they say she wasn't married? Who's that guy? Don't know, but he's so handsome. No matter how handsome, you can't eat good looks. Ethan stared at Oscar's hand, habitually around my waist. He spoke slowly, How interesting, are you this attentive to all your mistress? His words silenced everyone, their gazes towards me now tinged with contempt. Oscar raised his hand and punched Ethan in the face. He didn't hold back. Blood immediately seeped from the corner of Ethan's mouth. Oscar grabbed his collar and said calmly, She's your sister-in-law, my lawful wife. Ethan's eyes tightened, he was stunned. Married? When did you get married? 5 years ago. Oscar straightened up, wiping the blood on the back of his hand. Hearing this, Ethan looked at me. His eyes showed extreme shock and brokenness. Just 1 year, in 1 year you could forget me completely. Teach me, how did you do it? Oscar blocked his line of sight. What right do you have to ask these questions, ex-boyfriend? Are you even that? More and more people gathered at the door. Why are they fighting? Someone wanted to intervene but was held back. That's Ethan Walsh's brother, the head of the Walsh family. Daisy turned pale. How is this possible? What right does she have? But no one answered her. I held Oscar's hand and said to the class representative, "We're leaving now." Ethan leaned on the railing to stand up, watching me leave. This time, I truly didn't look back. Even though his face was covered in blood. I never thought I'd see Ethan Walsh again. As the lift opened, there he was, standing at my door. He had been waiting for a long time. The cigarette butt burned his hand, but he didn't even notice. He said he came to deliver an invitation to his and Daisy Carter's wedding. "You should come, sis-in-law." When he said this title, his eyes held a self-deprecating mockery. "If you're not feeling well, you don't have to come." I took the invitation and looked down at the photo. He watched me intently. As my hair fell forward, he instinctively reached out to tuck it behind my ear. My hand moved first. Our hands touched briefly. I pulled my hand back and said to him, "This is good. Ethan, you have your love, and I have mine." He tried to find a trace of pretense on my face and asked, "Don't you hate me?" By the end, love became indistinguishable. "I just felt tired and didn't want to see you anymore. But now it's all in the past. Ethan, I never thought I'd be the one to say these words. As friends, I sincerely wish you happiness." His eyes were dry, filled with undisguised melancholy. He laughed it off, saying, "Thank you." He turned away, no longer looking at me. I said, "If you don't have anything else, I'll go in." "Kathy." He asked casually, "What do you look like in a wedding dress?" I was taken aback. "Ethan, that's none of your business." I opened the door to go in. But he grabbed my hand, not letting me leave. "How can it not be my business?" His voice was hoarse. "I was here first." He sank to his knees, pressing my hand to his forehead. "I was here first. You loved me for 10 years. I don't want to marry anyone else. I only want you. Come back to me. Let's start over." I felt wetness on the back of my hand. In all the years I've known Ethan, I've never seen him cry like this. I don't know what he's crying about. But I know that the Kathy from 10 years ago doesn't want these belated tears. After crying countless times for him, she finally understood one thing. If tears counted, love would never be unrequited. If I could, I pulled my hand away and said calmly, "I wish I had never met you." "I wish I had met you earlier," Oscar said as I was applying ointment to his arm. "I'll wait for you after class and walk you home," he continued. "So you don't have to go through all this alone." My hand holding the cotton swab paused. I wrapped my arms and legs around him, hugging him tightly, feeling my unease dissipate. "We still have many decades ahead of us," I said. Oscar's lips curved into a smile as he leaned down to kiss me. The kiss deepened, making me lose my balance. His hands roamed freely, our breaths becoming ragged. He lifted me onto the kitchen island. Suddenly, we heard a dog bark nearby. We both froze. "Oscar, I brought home a stray dog," I explained. In the corner, a small white dog poked its head out of a box. Oscar paused, then smiled inexplicably. He gently pulled down my shirt, wiped the corner of my mouth, and held me tenderly in his arms. He told me he used to have a small dog too. "What was its name?" I asked. "Cupid." "That sounds familiar," I said, having a sudden realization. "Isn't that also the name of your private ski resort?" He missed the dog but could never find it again. As a teenager, Oscar named the ski slope after his dog so he wouldn't forget it. In his 20s, on that snow-covered mountaintop, he couldn't find any trace of me. He made a wish to Cupid. Little dog, please bring her back to me." Then, he heard the sound of a bell. Ethan Walsh's side story. Women. They're all the same. The morning Kathy left, Ethan woke up and instinctively reached out with his left hand, only to find cold sheets. It took Ethan 3 minutes to accept the fact that she was gone. It didn't matter. If she wanted to leave, let her. It wasn't a relationship that required any responsibility anyway. He called a moving company and had all her things removed, piece by piece, until the place was empty. This was good. Out of sight, out of mind. Friends invited him out for drinks. He went. They didn't ask about her either. It wasn't the kind of relationship people would congratulate you on anyway. He just felt a bit bored. He went back to work, throwing himself into a startup project until he was exhausted. Then he wasn't bored anymore. Back home, everything was his own, familiar and comfortable. This was good. Everything was gone. It felt great. He fell asleep as soon as his head hit the pillow. If there was anything to blame, it was that pillow. As soon as he closed his eyes, all he could hear was her voice. Ethan, is it comfortable? I spent a long time choosing it. Ethan, what are you doing? Ethan, when are you coming home? He spent a year trying to forget her voice every night. Don't be so useless, he told himself. She's just a woman. But he couldn't forget. Finally, on the night he was rushed to the hospital for severe sleep deprivation, he found a moment of respite in his unconscious state. His mind was finally quiet. In that silence, he could hear his inner voice clearly. When she comes back, I'll forgive her. So, please come back soon. When he woke up, his mind was clear. He canceled his flight. He didn't want to hear any more news about Kathy Lowe. On his last day in the hospital, he saw a young couple through the glass. The young man had been hit by an electric scooter. The girl was crying hysterically. Her tears kept flowing, and at some point Ethan was reminded of Kathy again. He remembered how she had once taken care of him day and night like that. How she had cried just as desperately. At the time, Ethan had found it amusing and asked her, "What's there to cry about?" "I'm fine, aren't I?" Kathy had looked up at him, sobbing, and asked, "Who am I to you?" Before this, Kathy had always been well-behaved and considerate, never pressuring him about their relationship. But this time she said, "Ethan, I'm neither your family nor your wife. If something happens to you, I can't even sign the consent form for surgery." The old man in the next bed said, "You're a lucky lad. The young lady cares for you so much." Ethan's eyes flickered. He reached out and held the sobbing Kathy in his arms. After being discharged that time, Ethan said to her, "I'll marry you." He thought Kathy would definitely agree. But the next day, she was gone. The house felt empty. He never met anyone like her again. Later, she really did come back. She became Oscar's wife and had her own child. Ethan thought he should get married too. He wanted to marry someone he had loved for 10 years, someone better than her. But there was no such person. And she didn't care at all. She never looked back. Many years after Kathy left, Ethan finally understood one truth. Those who betray true love will never find love again.